Everybody, it's Seano McFarland, and welcome to the Seano Show. I'm your host, Seano McFarland. My guest today is David Cabrera. He's a musician. He's a meditation teacher. He's also the musical director for J-Lo's new tour, and he's also one of the funkiest soul brothers in the world. You were sober,
right?
But you were depressed.
Yeah.
You were stuck in your sad story.
I recognized that I was an alcoholic. It brought me down to my knees. God was reaching out to me. Mm-hmm. And God was, through my friend who I've known all my life, was offering me another chance.
Sorry, Dad. Sorry, abuser. Sorry, coach. Sorry, brother. I'm in alignment here. God gave me a gift, and I'm going to fucking take this gift and take it on the road. Hey, man. Welcome, buddy.
Bro, it's always good to come home, bro. I'm so happy to be here.
Buddy, we've got lots to cover.
Yep.
How about we start with how you found me, where you were at during that time in your life, and then let's kind of walk through how we ended up here today.
Oh, wow.
Is that cool?
Yeah, it's fine.
All right.
Yeah, that's fine. Man, where do I begin? Yeah, it was right around the pandemic. It was like at the height of the pandemic. My industry pretty much shut down. And I turned to what I used to normally turn to, wasn't working for me, you know, whether it was meditation, whether it was martial arts, whether it was music, none of those things were really working for me. During that time, there was a lot of pressure, financial pressure, but really the cause of it was I began to drink more and more. And for the first time in my life, even though for 32 years I had cold turkey cocaine, you know,
right?
Yeah, I did that self-will.
No blow for 32 years.
Yeah, man, still, right? And still, yeah, you know, like I don't have any problems with anything else. And so when the money ran out, you know, and we're in the middle of this pandemic, I have a wife and a young child, and just the pressure of that. You know, for the first time, I really started to got into a place where, like, my right hand was dead, you know, and I knew I couldn't trust my mind anymore because I was really thinking of suicidal thoughts. I thought it was
you were in a dark place, man.
Yeah, I thought it was easier for me to be gone. You know, I didn't want any more of that. You know, losing your home, all kinds of things that was going on with that. No business, no work, and it really got to a really bad point, you know. I know you know of my car, and one day I was in that Impala, you know, with a fifth of vodka riding shotgun, and I was just blowing red lights. I really didn't care what I hit and who I hit, and no matter how much I tried, I knew that something was keeping me alive. And I remember the conversations with God were very much like, you know, I won't do it, so why won't you just do it for me? Somehow in all of that, it was so bad until a dear friend, childhood friend of mine, had reached out to me. And that night I was shooting flares out, and he really felt like he knew that I was in a really bad way, and I was in a really bad way that night. And he reached out and he called me, my friend Jimmy, rest in peace. So when he called me and he said, like, don't you fucking do it. He said, don't you fucking do it. You're my only brother that I have left. And you know why? He says, I just couldn't answer him. He goes, because when I was standing at the ledge, or on the bridge, you know who saved my fucking life? You saved my fucking life. Mm-hmm. And that to me was, I really felt like God was reaching out to me. Mm-hmm. And God was, through my friend who I've known all my life, was offering me another chance. So something in me was like, okay, I really gotta, what do I do, you know? And somebody who I drew a lot of inspiration from was our brother Mike.
Mm-hmm. Just so everybody knows, we're talking about the champ, Michael Tyson. Yes.
Because we have a similar story in that I grew up in the Bronx, on the main street of the Bronx. But let's just say, you know, I grew up with gangs and all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. So one day I knew he had his podcast. I started watching his podcast, and he was talking about being scared. And in that podcast, you were sitting there, you were there with him. And he was talking about, I'm afraid of everything. That's why I attack. That's why I attack. And I was just like resonating with everything he was saying. And then it was something that was the first time I had seen you. And it was something that you said on there. You said, I recognized early on that I suffer from a Seano problem. And I never quite heard that. And I literally wrote that down, that I suffer from a David problem. And that was that was another like lightning bolt moment for me, that something in me, call it divine intervention, was like, I have to get in touch with this person. I have to at least talk to this person, And
you were very persistent in doing that, right?
Yeah, I had to. And nothing was working.
Right.
So the whole point was all of these modalities that I learned, they weren't working, and it wasn't until I heard you say that, that it hit me like a lightning bolt. And then I started reaching out to you.
Right. Yeah.
And you've been really busy, and you have a bunch of, you have your stuff going on. And then somewhere along the way, I want to say my last drunk was a couple years ago. And, I was faced with this major lawsuit, and money wise, and the industry began to open up, and I was at the Hollywood Bowl playing a concert with Gustavo Dudamel, meanwhile I'm at the corner bar, killing a bottle of mezcal.
Right. Wow.
And that was my last drunk. And I was doing the best that I could. I knew that I didn't know what was wrong with me. I knew that I didn't want to die. And still I wasn't emotionally sober enough or mature enough to understand the components yet. Because in my wacky mind, it's like, oh, the alcohol is not a problem. This is just a money problem. Someone just needs to loan me, $500,000 and I'm out of the hole and I'm good and I can
keep it going.
Right. Keep it going. Yeah. And then we finally had that talk.
First of all, I love the idea of you being from Hollywood Bowl to Hollywood Boulevard. Right. The through line, you're performing with one of the greatest maestros of all time.
Right.
At one of the greatest venues in the world.
Right.
And you're fucking ready to take your fucking own life. But I want to say one thing that's really important to the listeners that I'm very big on, and you know this, David, okay? You got to let people know what's going on. You kept asking for help, even while you're getting ready to call it a day.
Yeah.
And that's really important. So we had our conversation. I got the lay of the land.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And we got to it. We got into it.
You connected me to my first sponsor, Matt.
For our listeners, what is a sponsor?
A sponsor is someone in a 12-step tradition, if you're not familiar with. It's someone who guides you through the steps. It's someone who's actually practiced the steps,
Right.
worked on the steps on their own, sort of lets you know what minds not to step in, shows you a clear path in the way of how to do things. And it's someone who is in essence, guiding you and helping you through your sobriety each and every day.
Right.
Helping you with those steps.
I connected you with Matt, and what happened?
So when we go and we talk, I'm totally dark and distraught, and Matt gets the lay of my problems, and I'm telling him, no, I lost the house and the COVID and all of these sorts of things. And in his exact words to me after I told him the reasons, right? Except for the obvious one, right? That I was alcoholic. He says to me, man, that story's so boring.
Right.
He goes, it's so boring. And I didn't understand that at first. And he said, this is what I want you to do. Because I want you to go and buy a big book. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, big book. I go, like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, big book? He goes, yeah, but don't trip. Every time you see the word alcoholic, you could supersede that with David or money or sex or food. And it was that was an eye opener for me because I was thinking I just have a money problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I like to remind people this is the only disease that tells you don't have it.
Right.
And it's a disease of amnesia. Even though you're dying of alcoholism, you were still in fierce denial about it.
Right.
How did we break the denial?
I didn't trust my mind. I didn't trust my ability to do shit anymore. At the same time, like you said, the disease is one that not only, tricks you into thinking you don't have a drinking problem. It also is the same voice that says you're a piece of shit.
You were sober,
Right.
but you were depressed.
Yeah.
You were stuck in your sad story.
Yeah.
You were having, we're going to talk about the debting. Okay.
Yeah.
You were serious financial.
Yep.
Jobs were not pouring in like they are pouring in now. We're going to get to that. Okay. I'm trying to remember. I think I know what it is. What was that moment with the aha moment, which was kind of your bottom in sobriety where you kind of said, I'm all in?
It took a little while.
Took 6 months, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely right.
What was that? What was that moment?
You helped me work through this too. Was I didn't trust people. That was the first thing, right? So I had a history of sexual child abuse. So trusting people was a big thing, right? And learning how to trust the program, learning how to trust my sponsor, learning how to trust all these people pointing me in this direction. That was a big thing for me. And I was still sort of sponsoring myself, even though I had a sponsor. You know, you guys were telling me to do certain things, and I would do a bunch of shit, but I wouldn't do all of it. You know, it was like go into an in-person meeting, like go. You know, that was a big one, right? And I hadn't quite done that. You know, I was doing the Zoom.
Why didn't you do that?
I didn't do it because I was still frightened and scared.
Thank you.
And there was a couple other things. I don't think I was emotionally mature and ready enough. I want to say in the big book, I forget the page, there's a story called Chance to Live, which is a beautiful story of a woman where she says, you know, my first 3 months of sobriety were hell. I didn't know when I should have been laughing, I was crying. When I was crying, I should have been laughing, and just didn't know how to deal with the emotions. They were just so loud. And it wasn't until I began to really follow and work the steps that once I did my step 4 and came up with the inventory, I was like, oh, I'm understanding this a little bit more. But it wasn't until 6 months in that when I walked into my homeroom, you know, by you urging me and my sponsor urging me and not taking the Zoom meetings, and I was making an excuse that I was so busy trying to pay the debt off, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't have time to go in. That as soon as when I walked into that room, the night before I walked into that room, that same sort of, I wasn't suicidal, but that same sort of volume of the noise and the fear.
The world was very loud for you.
That night, I was up all night. I was in the bathroom. I was curled up in a fetal position. I was sober. And I was just like, I couldn't move anymore. And I knew I had to do something. I go, well, I'm going to find a meeting. And I found a meeting like less than a mile from my house. And I started to go to that meeting every day. And that was the beginning of really, I want to say, of just really understanding what was happening, right? And I threw myself in the service when I got there. I became the bartender every Thursday. Now I'm on Mondays when I'm home. They knew I was a meditation teacher. I started teaching 11-step prayer and meditation on Sundays. And I took the advice of those 90 meetings, 90 days. I just went every day. Shared when they asked me to. Some of those shares were, you know, like truth serum, you know, it was just a wonderful way to learn how to tell the truth. But that was when it became visceral. Like the Zoom things are all right, I get it. But for me, it's a lot like music. It's like if you're doing it, and I'm not hating on nobody by saying that, I can only speak for myself. Going to the Zoom Alcoholics Anonymous AA meetings was like lip syncing. You know, but in the real room, it's like singing. It's like, oh, okay, this is real, you know. And then, you know, obviously the relationships that I made through that. And I never forget, and he's funny, a brother of mine from the homeroom had texted me today. He's got 30 years in. I never forget it because he sat next to me that day. And he said to me, he said, hey man, do me a favor. He goes, I need you here. I need you to come here every day, man, because I need you here. That's what he said to me. And in my wacky ass thinking, I thought to myself, I got to go to the meeting tomorrow because Alberto asked me. He said, please, man, do me a favor.
Right.
Be here for him.
Yeah.
Right? You see what I mean? Right? So he was just that alone, that
Yeah.
That statement alone taught me so much later on. Like later on, I think now when I think about it, I'm like, oh, okay, I see how this is working.
So you found the rooms finally, okay? You found your higher power, God of your own understanding, right?
Huge.
We'll
Yes.
talk about that. We started not blaming other people for your troubles,
Right.
even though money was still unbelievably tight,
Yep.
okay? You had some cravings, but it wasn't too bad.
None. Yeah, I did.
A couple times when things got funky, right?
Yeah.
And then here's this is something I really believe in. And of course, you're one of the greatest testaments to this, okay? No matter how far down the scale we've gone, that's the line. It's such a great line, right? You just show up.
Right.
You get right with your higher power. You clean house.
Right.
You do your inventory.
Right.
Which you did. And we'll talk about that as well. And you make it not about you and you help other people.
Right.
And in between that, incredible things happen. Then you got the first tour.
Right.
Ricky dropped in.
Right.
And we're talking about Ricky Martin. And you were the musical conductor for that tour, which lasted for how long?
A couple years. Still going right now.
Right? So that came in.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
I mean, lots of other things. Lots of miracles started happening. Started working with the Latin Grammys. Started teaching began to flourish in many ways. And it's funny because good things started to turn around and happen. You touched on something that's really important. I truly found God in the room. And there was something about the order of that, right? That my faith was dependent upon, with my understanding, with my higher power, that of God's love for me and the potential I have in God's eyes. And that was different. That was a different way to move through the world. And I didn't have money. And I was learning how to be okay with that. And there was something in the subtraction, learning how to subtract, like learning to get rid of things, that really made more room for God in my life.
Beautiful. Let me go with this. So we talk a lot about on the show, and certainly with you, there's physical sobriety.
Yeah.
Then there's emotional sobriety.
Yeah.
Now we started talking emotional sobriety. Right. I think it's hard for people to do this, of course. There's something about you got to be willing to let go absolutely of everything.
Right.
Money was tight.
Right.
You had your prized 64 Paula.
Yeah.
And I said to David, you'd not like this. You got to sell the car, man. Like, no, I can't. No, I want you. Not, okay, you're going to. And you fought it for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then you sold it.
Yeah.
You sold your most prized possession. Yeah. Why did you sell it?
An old timer I talked to from Indianapolis. I won't say his name because of anonymity. He actually said to me, "How free do you want to be?"
Amen, brother. Right on.
And that's a question that I always ask when I feel tight or when I feel fearful. Like, how free do you want to be? How free do you want to be from this? And I created a story around the car because my dad used to have one. And actually, we're talking about a step 4. When I did step 4, I recognized that I bought that car as a resentment to everybody around me because I felt like I deserved it.
Yeah. Entitlement.
Yeah. Like, it's mine. I buy whatever the hell I want.
Grammy, I do what I want. I'm fucking like, yeah.
Right. You got that? This is mine.
Yeah.
No one can F with me with this. And as hard as that was, with all of the stories that I created around that car, right? And made it so special. You know what I mean? And you got attention in that car. My dad had one. Used to have my dad's things in it, and I used to had some wacky ass story like, oh, I bought this car for my dad in honor of my dad. If he were alive, he would be driving this car, which if he were alive, I would have.
Sure.
But let's just face it, I was totally egotistical and selfish and self-centered, and that's when I began to buy in. And once I sold that car, was it felt like I cut all my hair off, and I felt, okay, now I recognize like that the less and less I needed, the more and more God was in my life. The more and more I needed something, right? The less and less God was in my life. So in other words, I was craving something like, oh, I want that car now. I was, for me anyway, I felt that as a direct sort of line to let me know, God's not present right now, because that's all you're thinking of.
You know, I came out here in 1990 with 3 years of sobriety. I went to a very famous men's nooner, Uncle John's Pancake House, and a guy I knew came up in this Rolls Royce, and it was during the summer, and I was saying hi to him, and he got out and he was sweating like really bad. I'm like, man, are you okay? What's going on? And he goes, yeah, he said, I can't afford to get the air conditioner fixed. Because junkies, addicts, a lot of people would rather look good, but they're dying inside. Right? Why are you laughing, right? Let's talk about debting.
Yeah.
And Debtors Anonymous and what you had to learn and how strict you've been on your finances, buddy. Because that's a really important thing for our listeners. And you're a great testament to that.
You know, it was tricky because your first year of sobriety, some people pink cloud. For some people, it's hell. For some people, you know, they say, don't do big things right away. Don't get divorced. Don't move. Don't get married, right? Don't try to resolve, even in the family afterward, you know, in the big book, it talks about, don't try to resolve all your finances at once. Like, you can't do that. And meanwhile, I had to move twice.
Right.
I have a wife who we're struggling with a baby in tow, taking care of her father, you know, and her family. I was the patriarch of the family. Had lawsuits, had a lawyer trying to sue us, and all kinds of things happening. I had to block, as my sponsor Matt would say, I had to block and tackle still. Like, what do you mean don't do major shit? I gotta move. I gotta do something, right? Like, and so there was one side in AA that was screaming service, 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 and devoting time to that. And then on the Debtors Anonymous side was this like a juxtaposition of boundaries, right? And from an emotional sobriety standpoint, you know, from debtors, it seemed like they had that a little bit more together, right? Their whole thing was tightening that up. I'm grateful to the first year of being as tumultuous as it was.
Sure.
Because I didn't drink through it, number one. Number two, I think it sharpened the iron emotionally for me from an emotional standpoint. So, for example, I was still not emotionally mature to deal with my finances. Even though I can give somebody all my numbers,
right,
keep numbers, and I was still vague. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to know if another lawsuit and small claims or a big lawsuit came through. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to look at it. I'd just pile it up. You know, vagueness was a big thing for me too, with being intoxicated emotionally. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to know it better than I didn't know it. And I think all of those hard things to go through sort of forced me in a way to be in a position later that when I got into debtors, began to work the 12 steps in that program, I had much more emotional sobriety, and maturity was the key. Right? I think it said that, you know, your emotional development stops the day you start drinking and doing drugs, right?
That's right.
In debtors, learning, you know, the program is the same, but it's a little bit different in the sense that, you know, God is in the numbers, and learning how to see God in all the numbers, learning how to see God in every dollar that you spend, learning how to see, that was such an important thing. Once I got into debtors, after the work that we've done and after the things that have happened and really being of service and going in it, I had a little bit more strength emotionally to sit with it, and maturity to kind of go through the numbers and not feel overwhelmed, not feel suicidal, really look at it, laugh at it, you know. And then that was a process of not all at once. So I began to little by little just for today. This month, I'm knocking down this small bill.
Right.
Next month is
Boom.
that bill.
But always something.
Yeah, it was always action.
You had to do something.
Little by little, you begin to learn how to speak to creditors. Little by little, you begin to understand, okay, what do I really need at this moment? You know, and at the same time, take care of yourself and be able to take care of your immediate needs.
What was the number total? It was over $250,000, wasn't it? What was the total number we started at?
I want to say over almost 400, like 380.
Yeah, right. 380. You settled with all the credit card companies.
Yeah.
Right? The lawsuits are done.
Yeah.
I think you're all good, right? What's left?
I've still a little bit to go.
Right.
I might be in a position, the whole idea is not to pay it off at once.
Right, of course. But everything's on track.
Yeah, everything's on track. Yeah,
and you're not afraid of it anymore.
No. Everything's
and you don't live beyond your means.
No. Not
You
at
actually
all.
might even be saving some money now.
I am.
How about that?
I am in the green.
You're on the road. It's Ricky Martin. You're traveling around the world. Temptation everywhere.
Yeah.
How do you stay sober? How do you not get involved with all the craziness?
It's funny because I haven't had a thought to drink in nearly a year and a half, right? Because in that 6-month mark, because I'm at 2 years, coming up on 2 years, at that 6-month mark, it was not that I wanted to, but I was still dreaming. I'd wake up and I'd drink in my dream. And I would feel like, oh shit, I lapsed, right? When I stopped, I knew I couldn't drink anymore. And I was just protecting myself from picking up again. And being on the road, the guys that I am with on the road, they're like family. We, as the musical director, I had a rule, and the rule was, and it's always sort of been this way, the rule was that there was no drinking before the show. I didn't really care what anyone did afterwards. They would bring booze in afterwards. Usually I always tried to maintain my schedule. So when the show was done, I was always the first in the van, and I was always the first in my hotel room, right? And that was one thing. And you taught me that in the sense of noticing what my Amber Alert was, right? And not putting myself in the crosshairs. So I would always investigate where and when I might be in that crosshair, and then I would just remove myself, just to err on the side of caution. And that began to grow and grow and grow, right? And being on the road, I can be in a bar and I don't feel any urge to drink. People are drinking and I feel great. I have my water. And then the other thing was, you remember, what's the Denzel movie where he's the pilot?
Oh, yeah.
And he empties the whole
Flight.
minibar?
Yeah.
I could damage the minibar in the day. But, you know, when I was doing the Grammys, for example, you know, when I went to the minibar, I was like, oh shit, M&M's.
I love it.
Right. And
really,
that's
the best.
Yeah, and really, there was no urge or anything like that.
But also I want to point out something very, my sponsor, I'll never forget this. He said, Seano, whenever you travel, 2 things: know where the nearest coffee shop is and know where your next meeting is. You also, something that's very important, you put sobriety number 1 is you would be in, Spain. You'd still find time to make our sessions. We'd figure it out. And you would go to meetings sometimes where nobody was there.
One day I went to the meeting, I told you, in New York City, and there was nobody, and it was just me and one other guy.
Right.
And we didn't know that the meeting was in another room.
Right.
So he and I just had a meeting by
Did your
ourselves.
own thing. 2 alcoholics getting together.
Yeah, until some guy comes in, what are y'all doing here? I said, well, we came to the meeting. No one showed up. He goes, no, man, you all have to come into the back door. The meeting is taking place. I really felt stronger being on the road, knowing that my day was figured out, where I had a safe place to go.
Somebody who's been a great teacher to me and has had great influence in my life, Jack Kornfield.
Yeah.
And you're blessed to work with him.
Yeah.
He's mentored you. You teach along with him.
Yeah.
Let's talk about meditation, maybe some stuff you learned from Jack. Yeah. Meditation for yourself, teaching it, sobriety, how it's balanced you out. What does it mean? Yeah.
Yeah. I did have a meditation practice for many years before that. And Jack was someone who very much inspired me too, as a teacher. There were some holes in my game later on. What I'm getting at is that I discovered that before I discovered I was an alcoholic.
Right. Yeah.
And the thing about my relationship with Jack was, and Tara Brock was another wonderful teacher who's a dear friend of mine. She and I are on on the same faculty too. I began to see them, and it was sort of the beginning of my questioning my spiritual journey, but I didn't have all the pieces. And so I knew them intimately as friends for many years. And then something in me along the way decided that I wanted to teach, that I had enough of the music business. And that was around, even though I was teaching martial arts at the time, that was around 2016. And then in that time, I met Jack. I would sit with Jack. I would go on retreats and sit with him and meet him. I would, Tara, the same thing. And then they offered an opportunity to train teachers. And then that's when it began, right? And so I became certified as a teacher with them. And then I was lucky because music had provided me a lifestyle that I could fly anywhere and go anywhere and be anywhere I wanted to. It was the same with martial arts. If a family member of an old Chinese lineage came to town and he was in San Francisco, I would fly out there and train with him. Right? I had that luxury because I knew they wouldn't come where we were living. And so it was the same in this aspect. So he was one of my teachers, and so was Tara. And then I got certified under Thupten Jinpa, who's the Dalai Lama's translator, when he would come to Nashville. And then that began to blossom into certain things. I am an instructor in somatic integration practices and tapping and all kinds of things, which I use in meditation. And from where I was at the time, we had a house in Miami, we had the house in Tennessee and Nashville. I began to teach at the Divinity School in Vanderbilt and offer retreats, and at the Osher Medical Clinic for cancer patients. And that started to grow. And we started the first BIPOC, for Indigenous people and people of color, Black Indigenous people, meditation group in Nashville, Tennessee. And all of these things began to sort of unfold. And I later learned that my family had a lineage of Cuban abolitionists that were fighting for the civil rights to free the African slave. So there was all of these sort of, this in my blood has always been in my DNA to be of service. I knew that sometimes it looked like me buying 100 sandwiches from Publix and giving them out in the neighborhoods that needed it the most. But then later, when I started to teach meditation, I began to get more into the community. And so Jack and Tara have been very instrumental. If I tell you, I mentor 5 groups now, and it's around 300 people.
Right.
Some people one-on-one. I have everything from hospice workers to doctors to therapists to musicians to moms to dads, people with physical disabilities, paraplegics. I was asked to lead at Spirit Rock, where it's Jack Kornfield's place out in Woodacre here in San Francisco. And they asked me to lead this year up throughout 2025. And the teaching just sort of blew up in this way where it felt right and it felt natural. With everything that I learned, and I knew how to help people and I was doing that, it wasn't helping me.
Right.
And it wasn't until I recognized that I was an alcoholic, it brought me down to my knees. And then, and I came into the rooms of AA, I found you and the work that we've done together. That it's funny that now, knowing what God is, you helped me. You helped me. You were the finger pointing to that moon all the time. That for me, now when I teach, it's funny because not only does it all make sense to me, we have a saying in the meditation community, it's like, you're not teaching being, you're being the teaching.
I love that. Right on.
And so the practice is one of embodiment. Like, it's one thing about trying to be compassionate or being kind or being patient. It's another thing to embody patience and kindness and compassion, right? One is already there. One is not like still trying to be, I need to be more patient, right? And so that's what started to happen. And I started to notice that difference, that I was literally embodying the teaching. Or as Maya Angelou would say, she would say, if you teach, you need to live your teaching. You better live your teaching.
So what are you teaching the guy? I know you volunteer at the clubhouse, the AA club. What are you teaching these guys? How are you helping these brothers and sisters out over there, huh?
Like in an AA room, we suffer from a thinking problem. Right? That's a huge thing. I go back to the basic, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So I teach them mindfulness of breath and body. I teach them mindfulness of thoughts, right? Teach them mindfulness of mind states. And then that begins to grow into like being mindfulness of dharma and conditions and those things. And it's in that order. That is the traditional way. And how it's taught is, if you master the first gate, all the other gates, if you master mind and breath, master breath and body, breath alone, you'll learn everything else. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's just, I keep it as simple as I can. I might offer some poetry and some art that's involved. And then oftentimes what I notice in the AA rooms is this. You see this?
Yeah.
So I notice from a somatic standpoint, the body's not ready to sit. So I'll offer some sort of movement or some sort of technique to that helps align the frontal cortex with the limbic area so that it brings the reasoning side of the brain back online. And then that way the nervous system can be in a place where it can relax a little bit and then be able to receive it. You know, and those are ways that I begin to train when I work with alcoholics, because a lot of them, you can't give too much too soon. You have to kind of prepare the body and just practice preparing the body. And the first, imagine the mind is a flood. Or a river that rages. So in order to cross it, right? The Buddha has a saying. He says, neither by tarrying or by hurrying or by stalling did I cross the flood. So you hear the steadiness in it. So the first pillar that has to be established is one that's calm and composed. And so I do my best to teach just that. Just be calm and composed when you sit. And the understanding that this is not a quantitative practice. It's a quality practice.
And self-knowledge avails us nothing.
Right.
And even though you had these extraordinary knowledge, you couldn't fucking stay sober.
No.
And you had to get humble and say, even though I can do all these things, I need something else. And you tied them together.
Yeah. And that's what I love about the 12 steps. Because the 12 steps has a practical way of bringing the spiritual practice into the world. So we can read all these old books and poetry and all of this prose and all of these scriptures, and it'll remain that way. Like, if to be super funny, like, you know, there's like in Kung Fu, there's tiger and there's dragon, there's crane. You can imagine going out and fighting somebody in the middle of the street and the brother just gets up in a crane. Like, no one looks like that, right? It's like ridiculous, right? So it's like, how do I take crane and adapt it to 2024? Right. And the steps, it was funny for me because when I knew all of this stuff, but as soon as I read the 12 steps, I was like, oh, that is how you take this light and be a light unto yourself and a light unto others, right? That is how you do that. You make your inventory, you learn how to tell the truth and learn how to trust and love God. Then you make amends to people, not harm them, right? In the process, right? Then you meditate and you pray and you give it to God. You make your daily lists of just your inventory. And then what do? It doesn't mean anything unless you give it out to others. Even the Buddha said it back in the day when people became arhats and enlightened. They created their own societies and they made their own monastery, and they'd go out in the village and they'd pick people. They would say, oh, he's ripe enough to become a monk. Then the Buddha's like, no, that don't work. That don't work. You need to get down from the ivory tower and you need to take it out into the street and help everybody meditate so they understand what it is that this is. And he was saying it. For me, intellectually, I knew it, but the 12 steps was like the field guide. Finally, like, this is how you do it right now.
Boom. I like to say, time to get your white robe dirty.
There it is.
Right? Now, the most thing I love talking about the most. You know what it is?
No.
Self-love.
Yeah.
One of the things that would bring a lot of emotion for you, I said, David, stop fucking playing small, man. Why are you playing small?
There was this sense of unworthiness, that I felt even when good things happened. I felt like I wasn't deserving of it. Mm-hmm. And I know where a lot of that came from. A lot of that came from not belonging anywhere. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel like I fit anywhere, and I didn't feel like I could trust people enough. And that came at an early age. And I grew up in the United States. Being Afro-Cuban, I was either black or not black enough. Mm-hmm. So I really didn't feel like I fit anywhere. And it wasn't until, there's that saying in the spiritual community, it's like, you want to belong, but at the same time, you want to stand out. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And when as a teacher, you're put on this pedestal. So you feel special, Musician, that's another thing. You're up doing your thing and you feel special doing it. You have this sense. But where I really ran into that again and again and again was the shame that I was dealing with. And that was something that I had to learn how to unravel. You helped me work with that too. Mm-hmm. In that even in my trauma as a sexual child abuse, as a survivor of that, I began to learn to see the blessing before the trauma. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Of course it does.
And then something started to happen, right? Was, in AA, we have this built-in forgetter. And you helped me. I had to remind myself, in those days I was down, you're like, you're a good father. Are you a good teacher? Are you, and remind myself of all the good that I actually do and contribute. Because the calculus, the calculus is like, man, you've got 40 years of beating yourself up versus, say, a handful of years in sobriety, and how that might look. Mm-hmm. And so getting used to that was a tricky, not a tricky thing. It takes a lot of hard work.
It's a muscle group.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a muscle group.
Yeah, it takes a lot of hard work
to claim your greatness.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And also, too, to your credit, and this is something very important I like to talk to my listeners about, and this is my experience working with people. Most trauma survivors from sexual abuse, particularly if it's male on male, no matter how great they are, there's always a voice, you're not good enough.
Absolutely.
And what we've done, what meditation does with the 12 steps, is we freeze frame that voice and say you were wrong.
Right.
Incorrect information, new operating system. Wrong, sorry dad, sorry abuser, sorry coach, sorry brother. I'm in alignment here. God gave me a gift, and I'm gonna fucking take this gift and take it on the road. I'm gonna help people wake up. I'm gonna get this guitar, I'm gonna do great things.
Right.
And we're doing it. And as I remind you, you're just like, Cito, I would say, oh my God, I can't believe all these jobs are coming. And I said, remember something, Dave, okay? You're not doing them a favor. You bring a lot to the table. We always here at Shell, especially cats like you and I, we're always grateful. We're always humble for the gig. We're 15 minutes early, 15 minutes late, okay? But, we're not beggars with our tin cups out. Right. We're grateful for the gig. We appreciate you, but our heads are high these days. We don't, right?
Right.
So that brings us to today, sir. You rushed over here from rehearsal with J-Lo.
Yeah.
This big world tour. You're the musical conductor. I mean, holy cow, man. I mean, what's it like working with, one of the biggest stars in the world? You're keeping all this in alignment.
Man, it's funny now because this is our third time working together, fourth time working together. So we have a history. It's a blessing. And it's one of those things like today, I don't feel like I have any problems, if that makes sense. I know that if the job doesn't come with a sense of nervousness or difficulty, that's part of it. And at the end of the day, I still feel I still have a sense of gratitude and still have a sense of like, I know that I'm not in control. Mm-hmm. This has been a bear to put together. It's still going on. It's going on right now while we're talking. But the difference is now for me is it's not a distance thing more than it is. I'm just so appreciative to God and grateful to God for the opportunities that happen, and that's way different, And the other thing that's different too is how I've been handling it this time around. What would normally rattle me or what would normally upset me or keep me tight or anxious, like those feelings or emotions have not arisen at all. Also I've had to hire musicians. I have to work with different personalities all the time. And everyone is sort of noticing some sort of change, the people who know me, but then some folks are meeting me for the first time, like, man, you need to teach me meditation. And it's one of these things where I feel like, I don't want to waste the day to do bad. I want to waste the day, if I spend the day, to do good. And I want to know when I lay down at the end of the day, when I talk to God, like, did I do good today? Did I help someone today? Like, that's the biggest thing. The music is an easy thing. Mm-hmm. And I know that all of these opportunities come from God, right now. I mean, there's nothing, all I had to do was really get out of the way of it. And I'm one of the lucky ones, Bro, I went to a really hard room the other night up the hill. And that was, like we say, we're garden variety. And not comparing, but I was really seeing some old timers that had something that I didn't want. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I was able to sense in me, and it wasn't a patting on my shoulder, but just a sense of the progress that I've made up until this point. Mm-hmm. And like, Davey, bro, you're like that. That hasn't happened to me yet, but at the same time was like, you really are doing really well, and those are things for me that the miracles still keep coming. Like, I can't tell you. And at the same time, I'm learning how to be even with that, in the sense of whether they happen or whether they don't happen. My faith is not dependent upon that, mm-hmm. And as a matter of fact, if it's always good, it's like, I have to be careful with that too, because it's a matter of time before something might happen.
Sure, something's gonna happen.
Right, and that's the thing, right? And so I recognize that. I recognize that I'm gonna forget sometimes, which is important. And so working in the program, working with the sponsor, working with you, meditating, praying, all these things, they help keep me in a state of being before. Does it make sense?
Yeah, big time. So let me jump in here. Okay. What we do here is our job. We're here to be of service. Right. And it's not, that's it. We're just here to help out. Number one, people will go and see the show whenever it is and where it's going to be traveling, whatever. And they go, oh my God, but they don't see the 16, 18 hour rehearsals you're doing every day. Right. Hard work. Right. The other thing, dear brother, that I want to talk to listeners about is you're dealing with lots of personalities. Okay? You don't just go in there flat-footed.
No.
You get centered. That's the meditation. So when the guy's yelling at you or he doesn't do the right bass hook or something like that, you don't go, motherfucker, shut the fuck up. I'm the fucking musical director. You have compassion. Sometimes you tell a motherfucker, shut the fuck up. Right?
You have to speak that language.
But you got to speak that language.
Yeah.
But you're Tai Chiing with people every day.
Yeah.
And you're not getting on their frequency. You're not getting, and you understand, oh, okay, they're scared or something. That's the work. That's the meditation. People, they're seeing your actions as the greatest teacher.
There we go. And I'm glad you said that, because it's about embodiment.
Right.
And I really feel like this is who I am. Right. And I feel this time around, because I get to pick the band. I feel this time around, I don't care if you're the most talented dude. If you're not
in sync,
if you're not a member of the community,
right,
then that's a whole other thing. And so I feel like the community that's around me is one that we're all on the same wavelength. The guys pray together, which is a beautiful thing, like, and they're good kids and they're good people. And it's exactly what you say, I'll use the words of the Buddha, to kind of better describe it. At some point, the practice becomes one where one is unmoved by the sounds and the smells and the sights of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's the thing that's happening. It's like, it's not scaring me or jarring me or going, oh man, what a bullshit day. I want to go drink something, or I'm going to harm myself in some way. On the contrary, and something you taught me too, and something actually in Debtors about boundaries taught me was the absorption of the energy. Like when it's really toxic or toxic conversation, I remove myself.
Mm-hmm.
If it's gossiping, I remove myself.
Right on.
And so it's one of those things to really like protect. You've taught me that, to protect my energy. Remember when we first started working, I was leading like 8-9 groups a week.
Right. Right.
And you're like,
brother,
how are you doing that?
well, because here, this is great. Codependency.
Right.
You did not know the art of saying no.
There it is.
Let's talk about the art of saying no and why that was so scary.
Yeah.
You don't want to disappoint. You don't want people not to like you.
There it is. And that was how to say no, thank you was one of the most compassionate actions that I could take. That's compassion too.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I were to take on too many responsibilities or projects on at the same time, that was a form of violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right on.
And so for me, you were helping me work through that. And it's funny, my dad picked up on it when I was a young man, like in my late teens. He would say, Davey, you have to learn how to say no to me, no to your mom. Like I was doing that shit back then, and that's that codependency side. And I wouldn't say struggle, but I'm still working on that.
Yeah, right on.
Because I want to be everything, you know what I mean? And in that saying no, the practices have been like for me, like little by little. For example, I'll go, okay, the phone gets turned on at 9 a.m. and it shuts off at 5 p.m.
Mm-hmm. But what about the thing? David, they might need you.
Right.
What?
Right.
You can't do that.
Right. Right. And have to sort of, you taught me that, that
Dare to disappoint.
Yeah. And that also an impeccable warrior isn't available all the time.
Yeah.
And that has to be honored and respected. And at the same time, those moments that I carve out is not a selfish thing. It's moments for God, and that's how I look for it. That's how I looked at it. I'm like, I'm going to play soccer with my son today after school for 2 hours, and the phone will be off, and that's it. And you can't reach me because I'm spending time with God. That's how I looked at it. And even with my mentoring with classes, I had some students going, but you were gone for 3 weeks and I'm here because of you. You know what I mean? And I'm like, you're not here because of me.
Amen.
You're here because for you.
Right on.
But not saying that in a harsh way, but at the same time, recognizing that
Got to teach them.
that's for you, right? And if I'm not here, I'm not here. You have to get used to the form not being here. Mm-hmm. And so that learning how to say no, thank you has been a huge thing. And another thing that's sort of branches off of that is I've been recognizing too that everything has been a gift to this point. Even my molestation, that was a gift, because you wouldn't have this version
That's right.
of me without any of that information.
That's right.
And I wonder too, in a more divine aspect, now we're getting into spirituality a little bit, if the spirit didn't pick a life like that in order to awaken me.
Jolt your ass up. Right on.
And I think, how else would I have known? I could have been drunk on, living a life that would never know this, and now I know. And that's the thing that I think that I know before I came into the program, before we met, that I didn't realize that. I didn't know what that was, Now I truly know what it is. Yeah. So even when I go to teach, sometimes I'll have no literature.
Just boom, see where it goes.
Yeah, and what's happening? That's what's happening.
That's what's happening.
And respond from a place of the heart, like respond from a place of, as God would have me respond,
Our beautiful Sylvia's getting married in Miami, right? At the Fina Hotel, she asked me to say a few words. I'm like, I want to put music to this. You're my musical conductor. I write this thing and very politely, that's great, Seano, but try saying it twice. And we would say, and then you played the music, and Sylvia said it was the best part of the wedding, okay? But I'm bringing that up because it was such a blessing to have you play and do that. And I hope we do more of that. But who was in the audience that night?
Oh, the champ.
The champ was there.
Champ was there.
And you were, right? And you went up and I did the introduction because we're here because of the champ.
Yeah.
And you said to him and he said to you.
Oh, man. It was funny was everyone was afraid to talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I went up to the champ and I shook his hand. I just said, I just want to let you know that the day that you said, that you were afraid of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just told him, I said, you don't know that day saved my life when you said that. And I thanked him. And I'm grateful to you because I was able to tell him.
Mm-hmm.
Man, he hugged me, he shook my hand, and he said to me, all the champ said to me was like, God is great. God is great.
Right.
God is great, bro. God is great. And that day for me was a huge day for me, brother.
And it was the magical moment.
And I can't express my gratitude to you and how much I love you. And whenever you wanted to because you're such a brilliant and artistic person, like you remind me of David Byrne, and we love the same music and all kinds of shit. And it's always a yes for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have the words to thank you and to know that when I'm with you, that I'm in the presence of God, and I can only imagine that if you've touched somebody half of what you've touched in my life, you by far for me have been my greatest teacher. Mm-hmm. You by far for me have been my greatest big brother and brother. Mm-hmm. You've helped me trust. Mm-hmm. You've helped me trust men.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And I want you to know that when I teach or when I lead or when I play music, I always take my teachers and my mentors with me.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, thank you.
And
brother.
So when they're standing there with me, those here and those gone, you're standing there with them.
Whew.
So I need you to know that. Mm-hmm. I need you to accept that
I'm
gift.
going to accept it. I'm going to take that in.
Thank
you.
And I understand something more today. It wasn't because of Mike Tyson. Mm-hmm. Mike was the finger pointing to you.
You're right.
You follow what I mean?
Yeah, big time. Thank you.
And it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And if I were to see the champ again, I say, bro, I forgot to tell you, thank you for connecting me to
Seano.
Yeah. Thank you for that, because he's the one, as much as you were the conduit to change for him too. Mm. Mm-hmm. And I want people need to know that.
I appreciate that, buddy. So listen, we're out of time.
Yeah.
You got to go to rehearsal.
Ah, man,
hey,
I wish.
I know. Thank you for your trust. Thank you for your faith. The only thing I ask is just keep spreading the love. Yeah. Just spread the love. That's all I want back. You know that, right?
I know.
All right, I love you.
I love you.
Bye. The Seano Show is a production of iHeart Podcasts, hosted by me, Seano McFarland, produced by Pod People and 28th Ave. Our lead producer is Keith Cornelek. Our executive producer is Lindsay Hoffman. Marketing lead is Ashley Weaver. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.